Go ahead, Shannon.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for inviting us. If you were at AERA 2 years ago, then we kind of got this conversation started and we're excited to keep it going. And so we shall see how this is in the webinar version. We wanted to start out, so again, Kari was going to be here to help give the introduction, but timely fashion, she actually was caught up with a student who needed a wellness check. And so several of us are experiencing these things. And again, I think that these discussions between us will be really helpful. But we wanted to start out by clarifying what our presentation is and what it isn't. And it is just what I'm saying. It's a discussion. What it isn't is the three of us are not experts in the field of mental wellness. We all have personal experiences that we'll be sharing with you. And just, we really want it to be a way for us all to continue growing as instructors and to, be able to support our students in what we're doing. This also will be an opportunity for us to think about the multi-levels of this issue, because we have us as people who are here supporting each other, and we also have mental health needs. We have our students who are trying to get through their degrees, but then our students, we're trying to also prepare them to be teachers. And then some of you, if you're at PhD institutions, then you're also trying to prepare people to be us. So there's several layers that we'll be talking about, but it's not meant to be us telling you things and speaking at you. We do want it to be a discussion. And so like Tori said, if you want to add stuff in the chat, we'll also have a shared document a little bit later in the presentation that we invite everyone to share resources. So that's what it is, what it isn't. And if anybody wants to karaoke beyond that, you can take that song. So ultimately, right, we have a different set of students than maybe even 6 years ago. And so globally, there is acknowledgement that mental health is on a decline. We have youth and adolescents who they hadn't been in school for a while because of COVID. We've kind of gotten really isolated. They're now in college and have higher anxiety than previous adolescents. Again, higher rates of depression, and then the fact that there's not great social skills either, right? And if we think of all of the skills that we need to be successful teachers in the K-12 settings, we do have to be able to interact with people. We have to be able to deal with failure. So things that faculty are reporting right now are seeing in our college students lacking resilience, having that fear of failure, little self-awareness, and few management skills. And so again, when we think about what our students are going to need as teachers, I mean, how many things go wrong in a single day in a K-12 setting, not just, like I said, in our own college settings. And so we really wanted to focus on this idea of how do we teach our students coping skills? And part of this is going to also deal with high turnover rates in K-12 settings. And so how can we teach coping skills to our college students so then when they go on to be teachers, they stay in the field a little bit longer, which also means that they're going to be able to do a better job longer and help benefit the reputation of what it means to be health and physical education teachers. And so your first opportunity to interact, right, is again, so we've kind of set the stage of what the popular opinion is of what the current college student is doing. Are you seeing less resilience? Are you seeing those students who are afraid to fail? Maybe they're not willing to answer when you're asking questions in class and things like that. And so if anybody does want to chime in, this is your first opportunity, and whether you use the chat or you raise your hand. all take a drink of hot tea while we wait for who will be the first one to contribute. Kate, would you like to add any examples?
Sure, yeah, I'll get started. I think, a couple years ago when we started this conversation, it was certainly right post-COVID. And then we were also dealing with some events that had happened on college campuses and really stuck in this place of trying to be a support for our students while also not feeling supported ourselves as the faculty members. And then realizing that that was going to transition to our students, that they would soon be the teachers trying to be the support for their students, but then not really having the support they need as far as social emotional learning or mental health as a teacher. And that's kind of where the conversation was born. And maybe before I go further, just kind of acknowledge and that we understand that mental health and social emotional learning are two distinct things, that they're, defined differently. So mental health being our depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and then our social emotional skills, thinking about our self-awareness or self-management, relationship building, and knowing that improving social emotional learning can contribute to our ability to manage our mental health, to help us reduce some of the symptoms that we might be experiencing. As far as here at the University of Idaho, I think Shannon really hit some of the big things that we see is just a real big concern about failure. They're just too afraid to even try because they really haven't had to overcome obstacles in the past. Also see a lot of them struggling with the idea of work-life balance and kind of trying to have conversations more of it, that balance is maybe not the right word, that spectrum is a better way to think about it, is that especially in a semester and especially in education, we're going to see ebb and flows. We might not always be right on balance, and you might be stressing yourself out thinking that it needs to be perfectly balanced all the time. So those are some of the things I would add to that conversation. I'd love to hear from anyone else, or if Idaho's unique, or if you're seeing other things at your institutions.
I can speak for so Craig Neiman, University of South Florida. We just experienced two back-to-back hurricanes. So we had students that, some of them lost everything that they have. But even those that didn't, like, they lost hours at work. Some of them lost jobs. The list goes on and on. And so, like, as a university, like, and really as faculty, like, we're trying to figure out our best way to support students based upon the resources that we have as a university. But like, we get, hundreds of emails, every week about different things. And a lot of that's, those resources get, go here for this, go here for that. And it's like, we're trying to provide those resources, but also like students are trying to figure out, like, how do they just navigate the day to day at this point, given what they've already experienced, while also having like these coursework demands that, we have as faculty, and, we're trying to be as accommodating as we can, but also like there are other, professors and faculty members at the university that aren't as accommodating. So there's this constant conflict, not only internal as faculty, but across the university as well.
And that's probably like a great example of, we're talking about the full spectrum of life traumatic experiences that are happening in our students' lives that are translating to then, like I said, now they won't, they're dealing with all of this stuff at home, and they're dealing with all these emotions. And so they're just checked out by the time they get to your class. So how are we even supposed to get the content to them?
And to that point, is the content even the most important at that point?
Anyone else want to chime in? Some things that came up just today, so I like to fill silence. That's where my anxiety shows up. But some things that showed up today were discussions about even imposter syndrome in our undergraduates, and that potentially we don't really talk about that until PhD programs. But our students are so worried that if they do speak up, somebody's going to find out that they weren't a starting athlete, or that they don't really know all of Mostyn's teaching styles, and they're going to get figured out if they speak up, and they do have anxiety about that. And I know even 10 years ago, I was seeing in my students an increase in that we thought maybe was from their parents posting everything on Facebook. And so all of their mistakes have been on social media. And so they're at the point where now they're on their own and they don't want their mistakes to be documented. And even if that means other people in the classroom hearing them. Okay, Kate, you want to keep going? I think you're the next slide.
Yeah, so we found actually a really excellent blog that we'll put at the end, or it's in our resources, and then actually we have something for everyone to share, and we can share it there as well. But it was coming up with strategies of what social emotional learning can look like in college. And we know that it can improve their relationships, if they're experiencing emotional distress, and increase their academic engagement and accomplishments. Many of us, if we are situated in a PEAT program, have a really unique opportunity, I believe, to work on this because of cohort models or having maybe smaller groups of subsets of students working together. But it's like you have to get them to that point where they feel comfortable doing that with each other. So how can we help them build those skills? We know that learning to cope with small challenges can help translate coping with more larger and traumatic challenges that may occur. Actually was speaking, I'm so glad he's here. Kelly Simonton and I were speaking earlier in the semester. It was probably only a month ago, but it feels like so long ago. But we were talking about, I think it was more framed around self-efficacy, but should we be planting experiences for our students to overcome challenges and overcome barriers within a lesson or within the classroom to help them build these skills, right? So that they are not, that's a safe environment, right? So, and I'll get into it more and slides of examples, but if we can create these in a safe environment where students have to work through something, we're providing them those skills, and we're overcoming and debriefing as a group and showing the safety that can come from that. And thinking that this is really important, because if our college students right now don't have these skills, but next year or in a year or two, they are going to be the ones in charge of teaching these skills, then we have a real lack of content knowledge that is kind of going to become a big issue. And on the flip side of that is, we know teacher burnout is a huge deal. We know a lot of people leave the profession within those first 5 years. And so if we're equipping with these skills, are we better preparing them to maybe have more longevity, or at least advocate for themselves to the point of saying, this is not okay because of this reason, and then seeking resources and help from themselves within the school environment. And so getting a little, can you flip the slide for me? Sorry, I was like pushing buttons over here. Some ideas, and this comes from the blog, just kind of some global ideas, and then we can get into more specific examples later, is having students set goals, right? But maybe we commonly do this related to, what do I want my fitness goal to be, or how am I going to improve this area? But could it be within the class? Maybe it's related to their teaching, or it's related to their ability to study for more challenging tests. Maybe that's outside of our class. Maybe they struggle in anatomy and physiology, but we can work with them in our classes on how to overcome those. And then helping them define what success looks like. What is realistic for them, right? I have conversations all the time about students don't always make A teachers, right? I've seen some incredible teachers who got C's in college for a variety of reasons, right? And that doesn't have to be the only reason or the only way you grade yourself. Also teaching students self-regulation skills to meet their goals. So talking about a feelings inventory. How do you feel when you're given this task? And when you have this feeling, how do you work through those problems, right? So when I get a big task, if I'm feeling very overwhelmed, why am I feeling overwhelmed? What's overwhelming about it? And what are strategies that I can use to get past those, right? Besides like the typical that I use, like my office is clean, my laundry's done, right? When I don't want to do something. But when I'm ready to sit down and do the work, how can I overcome that? Explicit statements on assignments. This came from the blog. I've never done that, but I think it's actually a really creative idea to put on there. Like, this typically is viewed as challenging. Let's set a goal for ourselves of how we're going to work through this problem. What I do find myself doing a lot is, as I'm announcing assignment, typically people find this assignment overwhelming. I just want you to take a deep breath, and I want you to remember that I'm structuring it in a way to help you find success, and I'm giving it to you in a timetable that is going to allow you to complete this in an appropriate time, right? So setting the stage for how you're structuring something as well. They also brought up this perseverance reflection tool, which I thought was really interesting. And essentially, it has the students think about their feelings that they're feeling maybe towards coursework, but it could be external in their life too. I'm struggling in my friendships. I'm struggling in my fraternity. I'm struggling being a student athlete. Or in Craig's example, they have just such larger things going on. I'm having a lot of empathy for my community, or I don't know how to meet my basic needs, so I can't focus here. And they identify all their feelings related to that using this inventory, and then asking a lot of structured questions around it, right? So what happens? What are my feelings? What are things that make me feel better? How can I go about doing this task that might elicit some of those feelings or help me overcome those feelings? They even suggested pairing it with assignments. So saying, this is a large assignment. I want you at 3 different times when you come up with a roadblock to write down what the roadblock is, write down your feelings, and then write down a strategy of how you overcome it. That might work for some of you, it might not work for all of us, but I think being aware of these tools can be really helpful. Some other ideas to kind of help students navigate. I think this first one is a little related to autonomy. I common use flexible deadline setting and say, okay, this is what I put on the syllabus. This is what makes sense to me, but I don't know what's happening in your other classes. Do we need to move the date? Okay, we're moving the date, but for some of you, that just means you're just going to put off working on it for another week or two. So I'm going to make you aware that if I'm pushing this back, that means you should still continue working on it instead of pulling an overnighter. Having mindful minutes within our classes, so starting class or ending classes with just a time of deep breathing or reflection, or time to kind of center ourselves before we go on with the rest of our day or the rest of the class. I think that we've probably all gone in to teach a class and we can just tell our students are not there. And then us as the instructor really modeling how you can honor where your class is and adjust your instruction based on what's needed. And I bring that up because if we're modeling this, I think we need to be really explicit to them, the strategy that we're using, and then encourage them to use it in their own classroom. I'm probably very guilty in my own teaching of doing things, thinking I'm demonstrating all these strategies, but if I'm not explicitly stating them, the majority of my students probably are not getting it. So explicitly stating, I see that we're not okay. I see that we're really overwhelmed. This is going to happen in schools too. Let's do a mindful minute. Let's look at our deadlines. Let's adjust our expectations. And then just simple like treat times. Is there little things that you can do? If we had a yogurt bar the other day in my class just to celebrate being done with our practicum, right? So little things, everyone brought something to contribute if they felt like they wanted to. If they didn't feel like they wanted to, that was fine. There was enough there without them. So just a time to celebrate each other and be with each other. If we can go to the next slide. Kind of already covered a lot of this. I'm really bad at that, is speaking ahead on the slide, so I apologize, but I will cover it again. But thinking about embedding this into our PEAT classes, being really explicit in what we're doing, and then kind of tying back to what I mentioned with Kelly that we were talking about is giving these really safe challenges. Sorry, we don't have basketballs today, so you're going to have to teach basketballs with volleyball, or you're going to have to teach basketball with volleyball. That's a really easy one probably for all of us to adjust from, but maybe the next one is, instead of having 25 minutes for a teacher, you're going to have 12. So I'm just going to need you to adjust and we'll move forward with that. Like all of these common things that happen. But with that, letting them know that their grade's not going to be severely affected. It's more about this experience and walking through how you would adjust and using that time you took away to have the peer debrief to help each other and work through it. Providing choice and autonomy for how they sign up for things or what they want to do, having flexible sign up days. You know, we have these 4 days of teaches. Let's think about our schedules collectively and who has the ability to go before others. And if you go last this time because you need the extra time, let's think about it the next time to be fair to others and maybe give them the opportunity to go towards the beginning or towards the end if it works. Highlighting affective and SEL through our assessment and intentional activities. A big one that we also do or I focus on is my students just really don't seem to have the ability to look ahead 3 weeks to see what's due, to work backwards to make sure that they're meeting their goals. So I do a bunch of lessons on backwards mapping to forward plan is the way I call it. I don't know if that's the right language, but that's what I call it there. But okay, this is our deadline. This is when we need to backtrack to have these different objectives done. And I've seen a lot of success through walking them through what that might look like. This is what we've done in college. What I've seen work pretty well here, and I don't know why the picture is not showing up, but playing cooperative games and highlighting this through debriefing. Health moves minds. If we're thinking about K-12 students, our students practice using them. They have some great social emotional learning teaching lessons. And then there's the book that Kevin Richards and Paul Wright came out with, Teaching Social Emotional Learning in Physical Education, which is a tremendous resource as well. So what are we doing in our classes, but then how are we taking this and, thank you, Tori, and translating it into how they will do it in the school. So making that connection for them of how they take these skills and move it over. And
Yeah, you do have a picture of the book on the slides because I can see it here. But so
yeah.
I apologize if those aren't popping up.
Yeah, that's
That'll
weird.
make the next one awkward because it has a QR code. So we'll see if that one pops up.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of things that she, talked about, like teaching them thinking ahead, planning for those deadlines. I've definitely found in my students that that's helpful. I chunk out assignments for them so that they can make those short-term goals. And again, we workshop a lot of things so that they're also practicing talking about what we're doing. And so we have found at UNK that's also really helpful, is that we're pointing out for them how to study. So we're not, again, we are teaching the study skills, but we're also trying to make sure we're teaching those coping skills and how that's going to help decrease your anxiety by making sure you're not all of a sudden cramming at the last minute. And so with that, we'll see if the next one's going to, oh, it was animated.
Okay, there it is. Yeah.
Surprise. So now if you didn't already see the photo or the picture when Tori was holding it up, that's what it looks like. Anyone else on that one? All right, so I didn't animate this photo. I'll also put the link. Oh, thank you. And Tori put the link to the book in here. So we have a shared document, and then that way, if you are that person who doesn't want to unmute yourself, but you do have resources to share, then we'd really love to hear, even if it's ideas, again, how you're structuring classes to help with these social emotional skills, any websites that you're using, things like that. So as we're talking, you can continue to add on to this, and you'll have access to it after the fact to use those. And again, just other examples that we talked about, so that your students aren't getting frustrated the first time there's a fire drill and now they don't have enough time to teach their lesson. Well, how do you deal with that and recognize that by you pointing out your modeling, like, hey, this has happened to us. We got kicked out of the gym at UNK, just like we really do in K-12. You know, and point that out to them, like, notice that I didn't let that overwhelm me. When your technology doesn't work, like, point out those opportunities where here's how I, as your instructor, how I'm coping with this and dealing with it and not getting angry, and I'm not taking it out on all of you. I'm not failing you all because the technology didn't work in class. And this is the same as when you're teaching and the basketball gets stuck up on the top and we can't play. We had a kickball that got stuck in the rafters this week, right? Like, that could have been the end all be all, and now we are all frustrated and the whole lesson's ruined. But instead, here's how we coped with that, right? So I did want to share my first year here. I did an 8-week intervention, and this kind of reinforced everything that I have learned up to this point, as far as learning those communication skills, learning how to be personally aware of your behaviors, your feelings, your emotions, so that then you can be helpful to others in their social emotional space as well. But I did an 8-week mindfulness intervention, and this was during COVID, so it had to be just like this on a webinar. And we had some of the participants did it live. Some of them watched the recording at their leisure. And ultimately, we just did simple things. And so I share this with you because we don't have to be trained, as Kate said at the beginning, like, I'm not a mental health expert, and I'm not trained in counseling. And so I know that that's outside of my scope, and that's not what I provide to my students, but I can point out self-awareness. I can do simple things like Kate said, the mindful minute, or mindful breathing, self-awareness. You know, likely all of us, when we learned anatomy, you know, if we did like progressive relaxation techniques in our sports groups, and just like take a second before we take this exam and just notice your feet on the floor, right? And so we just did very simple things like that. And it was a one time a week for 1 hour. And we went through just these very basic self-awareness, mindfulness practices. And over those 8 weeks, everything that we were hoping for did show up. So they increased their mindful attention, and these were the scales that we used. They decreased perceived stress. And again, this was during lockdown. And so we had other data showing amounts of stress just in their daily life from the lockdown. They saw improvements in their resilience, so the brief resilience scale. And then even during lockdown, where they really were isolated, there was a decrease in their loneliness perceptions. And so, because of IRB, it wasn't actually like this. They only saw me. So they didn't get to see that there were other people in the room with them. But through them sharing what they were learning with their family members, with their friends, with their roommates that they were getting to see, whatever it was that contributed to that, their sense of loneliness decreased over those 8 weeks. And so, like, these are all great things that we want to see in our students. Like Kate also mentioned, is that if you do have those cohort setups, so we don't really have a cohort, but we do only offer some classes fall and some in spring. And so they naturally end up in these little groups, and they're getting these opportunities to socialize, to discuss. And because they feel safe in that environment, it also opens the door for me to encourage them. Like, I bring up, we do frish use. So on Friday, we talk about like hot topics and issues in health and physical education, and we do debates. And so we practice being able to speak and represent your point of view. They have to research different points of view, and they're assigned, in some of the cases, they're assigned a side, and they're not allowed to tell us what they personally feel. They have to research a side of a issue. And then they have to be able to speak about it and not get into arguments and be empathetic and recognize that there is a reason why people feel the way that they feel, and that it is justifiable to have a different perspective than somebody else in our class. And so we actually do practice these things in a safe space, so that then when they get to the point that maybe they are in an argument, this semester I have a student who just graduated, and she said she has a parent who called the office because she was forcing the child to do 1 push-up in a minute so that she didn't give her a 0. She was like, just do 1 push-up. Like, I don't even care if it's a great push-up, just like make any type of effort. And the student wouldn't do it, so the parent still called the principal. And so now she's like, all right, so how do I have that discussion? And again, advocate for myself, try to show that I really am doing fitness testing, to help students learn about their bodies, but without getting angry and taking things really personally. And so she related back to when she had been in that 450 class, and she had to have a disagreement during our Frishies Friday and practice presenting her argument and presenting her data without getting heated and without losing her job. And so that's been, again, another way that just trying to encourage our students to learn how to communicate, to learn how to self-regulate, to check in with themselves, right? And even just through the breathing, like notice when your breathing is tight, and then, okay, so this is one of those seconds where I do need to take a breath before I respond and lose my job. Again, I mentioned at the beginning that for those of you, I am not at a university where we have PhD students, but if you are preparing PhD students, so then how many of us were prepared to teach our college students social emotional learning? And I would say, just from conversations I've had, most of us did not receive any type of training in that. And so most of what I have learned is going out to other resources, making use of my networks and learning more. I'm also part of the Stress and Coping SIG, because then I get to go to their sessions. I know when their sessions are, and I can learn more from my colleagues who are in stress and coping. And that helps me, again, with my instruction. But that could be another space that we talk about, or that you use the shared document of how do we teach our future professors and Pete Heat faculty to support college students who are then supporting K-12 students, right? I love the meta of it all. After talking at the SIG 2 years ago at the Invisible College, we actually created at UNK, just for teacher education, is the importance for our teacher education faculty to integrate coping skills into their classes. Another, I guess, detail I left out of the previous slide, with that research study, I didn't blatantly point out to them, and I intentionally did not ever point out like, hey, these are things you could do in your class. And all of the participants were from teacher ed programs at 2 universities. But at the end in the interviews, one of the questions was, are these strategies and skills that you would teach when you're a teacher, right? Like, would you include those mindful minutes? Would you include personal awareness and breathing right before taking an exam and things like that? And a lot of them did say yes, but a lot of them, like Kate said, like, they didn't ever think about the fact that something that they were learning for their own self-regulation could help their future students. And it wasn't until I asked the question in the interview that they were like, oh, actually, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, I did share it with my mom, or I shared it, like I said, with my roommate. I just never thought that this is something, like, you're right, I should make sure I tell my, future middle schoolers also how to do this. And so that practice of pointing out is really important, and that is covered a lot in that teacher ed resource. So that is something that I was a part of that is created, that's out there and available to you. But we do want to know about some of the other things that you all are using to prepare you for helping your students learn about social and emotional learning. It's repetitive to say that, sorry. And so I do see a couple people have written on the shared document. Would anybody like to expand on things that you shared? I'm going to mute myself. But if you're the anonymous armadillo, you should unmute yourself.
Just
Yeah,
be fully
I have
transparent.
one. I think one of the biggest ways for TPSR, I think TPSR is kind of a little bit more abstract for students to grasp. So I will just deliver a lesson through TPSR with the awareness talk, activity time, group discussion, personal reflection, and then talk about it. And you know, because they've seen it and read a little bit on it. So I think just doing as many lessons as I can through the model really helps them out, and then to highlight those SEL components.
Shannon, how do I know what animal I am on this Google thing?
I have no idea.
Dang it.
It looks like
Okay.
we have a goose and a giraffe and a dinosaur.
I'd be happy to share something if we have space.
Yeah, please.
So I think I look at some of the SEL development from a slightly different lens on some of the things I've done. And the unfortunate and events and atrocities on the extreme end that have happened at like Idaho and USF that Craig and Kate brought up. I've don't have those circumstances, but I approach it more like the day-to-day challenges that I notice students don't have the skills and abilities to handle. And I really feel, part of our role as teacher educators is preparing students to be able to deal with the day-to-day. And if we aren't supporting their development for things like basic resilience or basic problem solving or, self-regulation, I don't know if we're really preparing them to be teachers despite all the technical skills we provide them. So a couple of things that I wrote down, and Kate, I'm bringing this up because Kate mentioned my name, so I felt an obligation to reply. But my background is not in wellness, as Shannon said. I have probably screwed up my students too much and all the things I've tried on them. So just full disclosure. My background is in motivation. And so I really started with having my students set goals as it relates to their coursework. So thinking about projects they have coming up, lesson plans, unit plans that they have. However, I never allow my students to write goals without an action plan to follow. And so if they write a goal like, I want to achieve this by the end of the week or get this amount done, they have to also come up with 2 to 3 steps that they're going to do during the week to achieve that goal. And I have heard from students that that's kind of nice because they kind of just set a goal and then they go on with their week. I also have started incorporating journaling, and students can journal each week or every 2 weeks is usually where it happens for me. And they can kind of vent, like what are the challenges they're facing as a teacher educator. However, again, maybe I'm on the wrong side of this, but I always make them follow up. If you have a problem, you don't get to be a problem presenter. You have to be a problem solver. And so if they vent and they share ideas that they're really struggling with, they then have to try to come up with a few solutions that maybe will assist them in overcoming whether it's a personal or professional problem. And one of the big things I talk about, and again, I could be wrong, I really talk about the importance of self-discipline, self-regulation, and prioritization. And so a lot of times I notice that overwhelming and anxiety feeling comes from a lot of ancillary things that I think they're used to, like allowing it to affect them, and they struggle with prioritizing things and the goals that they have professionally. So those are some things that I've started doing to really focus in their attention on how important it is to persevere and overcome and handle the day-to-day and not let it derail them. So sorry to go on and on, but I just put some notes down as you were talking.
Yeah, I love those, and I am going to stop sharing so that people, I'll put it back up when we have our references, but that way when people speak, we can see them. But yeah, and that goes along with, you know, a lot of the other work that's out there. So we already, names are always hard for me, but we talked about perceived mattering in and around itself. And so like that is one of the things, bringing in, you said teacher burnout. And so like Amy Mays Woods, Doug Ellison, Julian Ensign, work that they've all done with teachers who have had resilience and who stayed in like high poverty schools. So again, a place where there is a lot of turnover. And so what are those skills that those teachers have? And like you said, they are self-aware and they can stick it out. That's why I'm such a, you know, good words, like I said. But with the perceived mattering, and Julene's, the word that she had was being a change agent. So she followed like new teachers over, I think, the last 10 or 15 years. And I think she's down from 15 who, when they first graduated, were in her dissertation. There's like 5 of them who are still working. But the ones who are still working are the ones who see themselves as change agents. And so like I use those words that our colleagues have checked in and said, like, these are the things that are helping our students or our graduates stay in the field. Then we talk about those things. And again, like we talk about marginalization and how do you deal with that? Like, you know, within teacher ed, and then I don't know the rest of you, if you're like me and you have exercise science, and like our exercise science program, like their offices are even upstairs. So like they are figuratively and literally above us. And so, you know, we talk about marginalization within our department, but then like what that's going to look like once you're teaching. And so how do you go out and make those connections and make sure you're not letting yourself be isolated in the gym? So that because it's the day-to-day that makes people quit, right? It's not, sometimes it is the big thing that is, you know, ultimately just too big and you can't get past it. But the day-to-day, those little details, you know, the empathy, the communication, those are the things that we really do, you know, it helps us stick it out. So thank you, Kelly, for all of those examples. Kevin Andrew Richards. That was the name. Sorry. I wanted to call it a different name. And so I just went with perceived mattering, but he's not here. So that's okay. I feel like this is a safe place for me to fail. Thank you for creating this space for me. Who else? Thoughts? I did see people sharing content.
I added some materials just related to case study discussions because we've done quite a few of those here. And we do teach our students the CASTLE framework and social emotional learning more broadly, and how they can, you know, we've really focused on how they can use that, incorporate it into their own teaching, but not always as much with their own personal lived experiences and the way they're navigating their day-to-day. That's still a work in progress, but the case study discussions, this particular academic year, the way we've used them, we have some already previously arranged, and we discuss how they would use as a professional in their space, but then also how it would be relatable to their current lived experiences, which has prompted a lot more thorough discussion and I think some problem solving that they may not even have been aware they needed to take on, or we didn't know they needed to take on. And it's opened the door for a lot more, you know, advanced discussions in ways like, if we have a student, for example, that has a history of navigating gender in relationship to physical education that we weren't even aware of, and it comes up in this particular space, and it's something they're experiencing on a day-to-day in their personal lives, it really levels the playing field in a way that we can all talk about it, and it becomes a much more safe space, but it's also very personally relatable for some folks. So I put some links to some of the books that we've used for case studies in that link that you provided.
So potentially Tori's the anonymous coyote.
Ooh, that's very Southwestern. I like it.
I also use code names for all of my, like when we're doing data in my classes. And so again, so even when they're putting up their data for our measurement and evaluation course, then, I mean, ultimately they can probably figure out who they were based on, you know, their pacer or whatever we were doing. But they always have some type of a 2-word random anonymous. I mean, I know that's Google's is the anonymous dinosaur, but it's just, again, another fun way to like, hey, it's okay. We can have our differences, we can use our data, we can talk about it, and it doesn't have to be singling people out.
Yeah, I wanted, Sean, if you're open, I wanted to follow up with you in TPSR and what, if you have a resource or just something to direct me to. I struggle, beautiful framework, right? And like I introduce it, but I don't think I always nail using it. And so the way you were using it was interesting to me. So if you have tips or a resource, I'd appreciate that.
Really just his book.
Okay.
I think that to me, that was the best way to get a really in-depth understanding of all the components.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think in this discussion, you really, to me, it's always about setting the tone for the class and for the semester. Like one thing that I didn't know it had this effect, but in a larger class, the first piece of homework they have is to send me an email. So they practice, sending an email. I give them an example, and they have to include some things, kind of their background. I give them some prompts, and then an academic goal and a personal goal. And then at the 8-week point, they do a self-assessment, and then they go back to those goals. And I like what Dr. Simonton said about the action plan, because I think some of those kids, they're like, I don't even remember what my goal was. But I make a point to respond to each of those emails in a very individualized way, and I speak to what they said. And a student at the end of the class, she wrote me a note, and she was like, I had a lot of anxiety about class, about college in general. And this was one of the things where it was like, I felt like this was going to be a good semester. Like I felt like I was seen, heard, valued in my response. But I think a lot of those things come back to just setting the tone. I really like the flexible deadlines and trying to provide that choice, like that differentiated instruction is the interest part. How can I tailor the course assignments to those goals? Whether somebody's more in exercise science or more physical education or yeah, but when it comes to TPSR, honestly, it's just for me, it's more just more practice using it and his book.
Oh, that's awesome. I just wrote down the email assignment. I thought that was great on multiple levels. Yeah, thank you.
And I'll throw out another one that we had students, nervous about having to call parents. And so I've actually, done collaborations with faculty at other universities where like our classes have to call each other. And so, just getting over that fear of dialing a number and speaking to a stranger and, instead of just doing everything through email. And then we do have homeschool physical education. And so last year I started at the end of the semester, they have to write letters to the families. And so like each of them adopts a family and they have to write personalized letters and they have to write out the address, the envelope and everything and put the stamp on by themselves. But those are, again, those little things that they have anxiety about because they haven't had to do it. And so if we can find ways to give them those opportunities to now have that knowledge of, even how to address the envelope, where to put the stamp. And so I'll just share the final screen. Again, I think Kate put a lot of those resources that we used up on the shared drive as well. And so if you want access to those links, then they're in there. So the blog that had a lot of great ideas for what we can do in our classes. Nice. I think that's the end of formally what we had to share and encourage people to talk about.
Thanks, Shannon and Kate. Does anyone have any final questions or thoughts to throw out there? We have a few minutes left prior to wrapping.
I'll jump in again if no one's gonna say anything. I've got a lot of thoughts on this, Shannon. Thank you guys for presenting this work. I think it's probably one of the more underdeveloped areas of teacher education training, and it has great implications on pre-service teacher development. And in fact, I think it's very unlikely that students can optimize their effectiveness as a teacher if they don't master some of these skills, not only in teaching them, but them navigating the field of, in a marginal field. So I think it's really important. I would be curious in the research that Shannon and Kate that you've done and the things you've talked about. Again, I am not looking at this from a lens of my mom died and I'm trying to figure out how to graduate this semester. I'm looking at it more like the day-to-day learning to be a pre-service teacher. What is the developmental phases of learning about SEL from a pre-service teacher perspective? Is there what do we jump in with? What's a good jumping off point? Do we know anything about that? Like where to start and what our goals should be at the end?
I'm really unaware, Kelly, and also want to say like this is a like I haven't done, Shannon has done research getting in this area. I have done none. It's just a conversation kind of got thrust into and have switched more to what you're saying, Kelly, of really thinking about it, opened my eyes to it, right? But thinking about I need to be doing this because these kids are not okay in their day-to-day life, even without external things, right? And so I'm not serving them well. But I think there's a lifetime worth of research in this area that I think has just not been done. So I spoke over Shannon, perhaps.
No, you're good. And I would say, so Tori brought up Castle and their framework. And so I threw that website up there. Because there are a ton of resources there too. The question that you pose though is really interesting because like you said, what are the developmental phases? And that's a valid question that I can't directly answer because I think generally it's one of those that I've done dynamically where introduce the idea of self-awareness as we go through anything. So even again in the measurement class, they have to, after every assessment that we do, just like you said with journaling, they have to document like how did it feel to be the subject and to be assessed in that way. Like, so they have to put themselves in that space of like realize that now if you're forcing everybody to do the mile run and you hate it, then why are we doing that? Like now we're just passing that on to the next generation of students. Is that like, well, because I had to do it, now you have to do it. And so I think I generally in instruction, I come at it just from like, hey, let's start paying attention to how it feels when we go through these things and do we even like them? To then like, maybe I don't have to fight with my K-12 students as much if I start listening to them and like, all right, how could we adjust this? What is fair to you? And so we do talk a lot about justice and fairness and equity, and just kind of, so where I say I do it kind of dynamically is that from those beginning conversations, then it's just naturally as stuff comes up, we have those conversations. And when I know they're interested in something, then I point out, like I said, like, hey, here's how I'm coping with this particular thing. And so I don't know though, and now I will have to go look it up, is there actually a developmental sequence of what the appropriate way is to teach social emotional skills.
Could I jump in for a second? My name is Nicolette Suhan. I'm a PhD student at the University of Illinois, and I'm not an expert by any means, but I did work with my advisor, Dr. Kevin Richards, to create a framework for social emotional learning in Pete. It's in review right now, so it hasn't been published yet. But kind of going off of your question is like, how did we teach it? That was kind of the foundation for how we addressed that paper. And we took on a Bloom's taxonomy mindset where we took the Castle framework. And then so we started with basic understanding. So first we have to make sure that students understand what social emotional learning is. So what are those competencies? Because I think we can assume that most students haven't been taught what social emotional learning is in K-12. So for us, we took on the approach of we wanted them to have understanding of what social emotional learning is for how it can help them and enhance their skills, but also how can it help them teach those skills. And so we started with like basic levels. So they had to kind of define social emotional learning, throwing in an autobiographical essay where maybe that's something that gets done a lot in PEEP programs, reflecting on their experiences, but adding in some questions about, did you experience SEL? What did SEL look like for you in your K-12? So kind of hitting that understanding and then moving up, we did some, we suggested some application things. So early field experiences where they're paired up with a high quality teacher, or like Tori had said, we talked about case-based learning because that is one of the best resources that we had. And then moving on to like analyzing and evaluating, we did some like some team teachings where they're practicing teaching SEL. And throughout the whole process, they're reflecting on how it helps them enhance their SEL too. And then we kind of ended by having them revisit those essays. And then at that point, they would be writing case studies based on their experiences, maybe in like a seminar class, so that those case studies are kind of being, we're not just recycling new ones, we're kind of adding in things that they're seeing as they're in the field. So it was like a really brushed version of that, but we're working on getting that published. I think that kind of helps like that's just one way that we could have like a framework.
That's really awesome. And you know that we will be watching for when that's out there. But also, Nicolette, remember this is a safe space. And so it's okay that Shannon forgets names while she's speaking. Stays here.
So don't tell your advisor that Shannon may or may not have remembered his name. But thanks, Nicolette, for sharing. That's super helpful. And I think that we'll all definitely be using that when it comes out. And Paul Wright was here on our campus this week, and he shared that he's on a few dissertation committees that are working towards solving that exact problem. So hopefully within the next, few months to a year, we'll actually have something tangible to work with to answer that question, Kelly and others. We've come up on our time for the presentation. So again, thank you so much, Shannon and Kate. I could stick around for a minute if anyone has any remaining questions, but I know everyone's got a lot of things on their plate. So thank you all so much for coming, and we'll see you hopefully in our November session. Bye, everyone.
Tori, I'm going to stick around just because I want to say hi.
Okay.
Thanks, Tori. I appreciate